So we want to talk about the political changes that occur in England specifically that lead us towards the decline of feudalism. So just a reminder, feudalism is this government system where people are in a social category based on their skill set. So we have knights, we have lords who are landlords, we have kings, we have peasants and serfs in one area. And so these people are put into this social category, and then basically that's where they stay, right? There is no movement. If I'm a peasant, I can't become a knight. I can't become a lord. I can't become a king. I'm a peasant for my entire life. My family is, are all peasants. My children will be peasants. What the social category that you are born into is where you die. And so what happens is over time, we see the power structure of feudalism, where the king has all the power no matter what. We see that shifting. And so what we want to do is we want to focus on how that power shifting actually affects feudalism. So we're going to look at the political changes in England. Now remember, you are to type the underlined portions into the notes section of your handout, and you should be following the bullet points I have provided. So I want to talk to you about King Henry II. Basically, King Henry II rises to power in England. He's the guy, if you remember from our Religion in Medieval Times notes, who disagrees with the church and tries to take some power for himself. And then he and his friend Thomas Becket get into an argument, and he accidentally has Thomas Becket killed. So he's not the the best example of like, this is the greatest king of England, but he was a very smart man. And so his entire reign, honestly, he focused on creating legal changes for a more just, or just really a more fair government. What Henry does is he rises to power, he fights for his throne, he actually wins the crown through war. And then he looks at this and he's like, this isn't really a fair system. It's not right that a peasant who steals something can be killed, whereas a lord who steals something literally goes unpunished, right? He's like, that's not really fair. And so what he does is he wants to create a legal change, creates legal change that focuses on creating that fair and just government. And so he creates this idea of a jury. Now, if any of your parents are home, I want you to go ask them, hey, mom, dad, grandma, grandpa, aunt, uncle, whoever you're living with, have you ever served on a jury? Well, basically, you guys, we have this today in the United States. A jury is a group of people who are called in to kind of vote on a court case, right? They decide who is guilty and who is not. And so Henry II is actually the one who creates this. He says, okay, we can't just have Martha from down the street say, I saw you steal a chicken, and then that's all we need. He's like, we actually have to have a trial. We have to have a jury, a group of people, hear the evidence, and then they can accuse the person of a serious crime. And not only that, but if you're going to be accused of a crime, you have to be tried before a judge. Henry comes into power, and it literally used to be like Martha says that Bob stole a chicken. Bob says, nuh-uh, I didn't steal a chicken. And the townspeople are like, we voted and we feel like you stole a chicken, so then they take care of it themselves. Henry II's like, no, you can't do that. We can't have just everyday people just deciding, what has happened. We actually need to have a really clear court case where there's a jury of people, that they're tried before a judge. And then, we need to get rid of this old-fashioned system. Now, the old-fashioned system basically was called ordeal and combat. What this means, you guys, is when Martha accuses Bob of stealing a chicken, they have to fight. And Martha and Bob are going to fight, and whoever wins is automatically right. So I want you to think about it this way. If someone's accused of murder, instead of having a court case or a judge hear the evidence or a jury vote, what they're going to say is, oh, you murdered so-and-so. Let's fight it out in the street. And if you win, that means you didn't murder anybody. But if I win, it means you did murder somebody. Now, there's two ways this can go. Number one, the person who's being accused is innocent, but they're weak, older, they're not a good fighter, so they are killed in the process, but they were actually innocent. However, because they were killed, the townspeople believe, oh, God said that you were guilty, therefore, God allowed me to win. So there's that problem. The other problem is if they're actually guilty of the crime they are accused of, but they're a really good fighter and they win the ordeal of combat, then they're a murderer who's getting away with it because they happen to win a fight in the street. And so Henry looks at this and he's like, that isn't fair. That isn't right. We need to actually have a system. We can't just rely on people, brute strength in the streets fighting it out just because they don't know any other way to do this. And so Henry comes in, he creates these legal changes. He says you have to have a jury, you have to be tried before a judge, and it's a system that we still actually use today. Now, continuing on with Henry II, he tries to strengthen those royal powers. And as we know, this leads him to the argument with the church, right? He's like, even if you're part of the church, you have to follow my laws. The church is like, dude, no, we have our own powers. We have our own laws. You don't get to control us. And so that leads him to an argument with the church. And we all know that he struggled a little bit with that. Well, basically, you guys, what he does is he comes back and he says, okay, look, here's what I want to have happen. He writes something called the Constitutions of Clarendon. For the record, this is a multiple choice question on the final exam. Constitutions of Clarendon, you have to know what this is. Basically, it's a document that says the king has the right to try the clergy, aka the church, accused of serious crimes in royal courts rather than church courts. It's his dream. It's his law. Even if you're part of the church, you are responsible for following the king's laws. Any clergy member, any priest, any archbishop, any member of the Catholic Church within that church structure, the Pope even really is what he's saying. If anybody commits a crime in England, they get to answer to him rather than answering to the churches. Now, we know from our previous notes, this leads us to a battle with Thomas Becket, who's the Archbishop of Canterbury. He says, oh, will no one rid me of this turbulent priest? And so his knights go and kill him. Henry II's excommunicated for a little bit. He has to say he's sorry. But what's important to understand is even with all that chaos, the Constitutions of Clarendon actually pass. They stand, they survive, and people actually have to follow it. And so this is a huge change in England, you guys. Not only is Henry II introducing the idea of a court system, but he is actually introducing this new law, the Constitution of Clarendon, where people in the Catholic Church have to follow his laws or they will answer to him. That is a big power change. We then get to Henry's least favorite son, King John. Actually, that's a lie. John was Henry's favorite son. Henry's wife, Eleanor, this was her least favorite kid. She really hated him. The guy didn't really stand a chance. But King John takes over for England. He is the youngest son of Henry II. He is not that popular. If you have seen Robin Hood, he is bad King John, basically. That's the legends that he has left behind. He made very powerful enemies during his time as king, basically by losing most of the land that the English had in France. England actually ruled most of France for quite some time, especially under Henry II's rule, because Henry II was actually from France. And he comes to the throne and he's like, yeah, my dad gave me an empire, but I lost half of it because I decided to have a silly war, and instead of winning, I lost. He also taxed his barons. So keep in mind that taxes are how governments work, right? The government says, because you live here, pay this much in taxes, we pay that, and our government can function. Now, taxes are important because you need to pay taxes in order for a government to function, but when you overtax people and you take more money than they actually have, people tend to get a little angry. And so his people were angry because he kept demanding more and more money from them even when they didn't have it. And then on top of that, he actually ignores the traditional rights of his noble classes. So as a lord or as a baron, I'm like, okay, that's great, I'm paying my taxes, but I have the right to go hunting and hunt whatever I want on my lands. And then John comes by and he's like, actually, you know what? I want to hunt there, so you don't get to anymore. And that's a huge deal for the lords at this time. And so his nobles didn't appreciate that. They're like, okay, not only did you lose the land that we controlled, not only are you taking all of our money, but now you're taking away our traditional rights, where for centuries we've been able to do kind of, these things, and you're telling us, no, you can't, not anymore. And then, like all kings who think that they are the absolute ruler, they have no one to tell them no, he arrested people who didn't like him whenever he wanted for whatever he wanted. So you didn't even have to commit a crime. And here's King John being like, oh, I don't like your face, you're under arrest. Which is the total opposite of what his father, Henry II, was trying to do, right? Henry II is like, hey, we need to have this great court system where it's fair and it's just and we have everything under control. And John's over there like, oh, that dude has a beard, I want him arrested because he has a beard. And so he is just completely violating everybody's rights, and they're getting really frustrated with it. And then, he's arguing with the church and collecting its money, so the church is kind of unhappy, which, again, if you're a king, You don't want the church to be unhappy with you. You don't want your wealthy people unhappy with you, and you really want to make sure that somebody in your country likes you. Well, John didn't really care, and so in 1215, angry barons are going to force him to come to a meeting, and they're going to make him sign a document called the Magna Carta. You guys, this is a turning point in world history. We are talking about an event that still affects us today in 2020. In 1215, his angry nobles, the barons, force him to have a meeting. And they basically are like, look, if you don't sign this paper, we're going to find ourselves a new king. So the Magna Carta is a legal document in England that basically says the king will continue to rule the country, right? The king will have the right to reign over England, but he has to recognize common law. He has to recognize those laws Henry II has created. He has to recognize that laws exist. He has to follow them. He also has to recognize the rights of barons, the rights of the nobles, right? So the nobles have traditional rights and the king has to respect them. And then lastly, he has to recognize the rights of the church. So what the Magna Carta does for the very first time in human history is it says that a king, no matter how much of a king you are, right? Like you can be the best king ever, but you are still tied to following the laws that you are forcing others to follow, right? If everyone else has to follow common law, so does the king. If the barons have specific rights and traditions that they value, the king has to respect that. If the church has rights that they value, the king has to respect that. And so basically on paper, John is forced to sign this, basically saying, as a king, I am not a god on earth. I am not able to do whatever I want whenever I want. I have to actually follow the rules that I force everybody else to follow. And that's a huge deal, guys. I know it seems like common sense to us today, but that is so important to understand because at the end of the day, the Magna Carta is the first time in human history where a king has said, I will follow the laws that I have created. And so an example of this is he can't raise taxes without talking to barons and the church officials first, right? So he actually has to ask for advice. Again, he can't do what he wants when he wants. He actually has to ask for advice first. He has to ask for permission. He has to talk it through, and he has to recognize the rights of others. From this, we get the idea of habeas corpus, which again, in 2020, we still use, all right? So habeas corpus is a law that says no man can be jailed except by lawful judgment of his peers or the law of the land. So basically what it says is no one can be thrown into jail without a reason. So no one can be put into jail just because the king doesn't like the look of your face. No one can be thrown into jail because the king ran into you in the hallway and he didn't appreciate that. There has to be a reason. There has to be somebody accusing you of a crime. There has to be a law that you have broken. One of those two things has to happen in order for that person to be jailed, even if it is just temporary. So again, it's going back to that system of creating a fair court. It's going back to this idea that basically you need to make sure that there is something fair where no matter what your social class is, if you are accused of a crime, you have the same punishment as somebody who is rich versus somebody who is poor. So we're going to listen to this lovely Horrible Histories Magna Carta video. I'm going to tell you guys right now, it is a rap battle video. I find it hysterical because I'm a history nerd, but I want you to be listening for three very specific things. And in your notes, in your hyperdoc, you will see I have listed out the questions for you. So I want you to list one complaint the barons have against the king. I want you to tell me why the king thinks he has absolute power. And then why does the king sign the Magna Carta? Why does he eventually sign it? What's his reasoning behind it? So this is a reenactment, again, of King John meeting with his nobles and being forced to sign the Magna Carta. Thinking that it's never going to last, it's never going to cause any actual change, and he's horribly wrong. So we have, the court system created by Henry II. We have the Constitution of Clarendon, which basically state that the church has to follow the king. And now we have King John signing away the, absolute power of kings and basically being like, yeah, I have to follow the laws that I create in my own country. So continuing on, you guys, we then get to King Edward I. Basically, Edward I takes a major step towards including more people within the English government. So we've already seen people gain power because they have a fair law system that allows them to have, laws that everyone follows. We've already seen the king lose power because he actually has to follow the laws within his own country. And now King Edward the First is going to say, okay, we want more people within the government. We don't just want the rich people in government. I want everyone. And so he calls together a group of people called the Model Parliament. Now, if you've been watching the news or if you've heard of any of, the American government structures, basically what you're looking at is we have Congress, right? We have a group of people within the House of Representatives that represents our states. We have senators who vote on things, and basically they speak for the people of America. This is England's version of that, and that's actually where we get our ideas. So we created our Congress based off of this Model Parliament. Model Parliament is a group of people that basically includes commoners, it includes lower ranking clergy, as well as church officials and nobles. So it's rich, it's poor, it's church, it's state, it's everybody in the same room. And they represent the entire people of that country. They are meant to come in and vote on things. They're meant to discuss things. They're meant to come in and share their opinions, no matter who they are. It provides a more equal voice for everybody involved. And so just so you can understand how critical this is, you guys, Parliament is still used today in 2020 in England to help people in power actually hear the voice of the common people. The Prime Minister goes in and goes, okay, guys, what's going on in this area of England? And the people from that area of England stand up and tell him what's happening. Again, it's rich and poor. It's the church. It's people who work for the government. It's everybody in one room to share what's going on. And so this is a huge change and a huge win for the people of England. So keeping in mind all of what I just discussed, we have the major impacts of these changes. The first thing you need to understand is that it automatically all of this strengthened royal power and took power from the nobles, right? So we have kings creating laws where everybody has rights and certain laws that they have to follow, even if they're rich or poor. So it's no longer like, oh, just because you have money, you can do what you want. They actually see the royal power strengthening because the king is putting systems in place that says, okay, no matter who you are, rich or poor, these are the laws you have to follow. But what's so important to understand is that feudalism as a system, right? The king on top, then the lords, then the knights, then the common people at the very bottom, our peasants and serfs. Feudalism is weakened because the common people are getting more and more and more power. Our common people, peasants and serfs, guess what? They're getting rights. They see laws that apply to them also apply to the wealthy people they're working for. They see the church being forced to follow the law. So that means that another part of their life is falling into place where everyone has to follow these rules. And so the common people are getting more and more power throughout this. And that means that feudalism really isn't needed anymore. We don't need to have our system of power to make sure that I as a peasant am protected because I can protect myself. My government protects me. My laws protect me. And I actually can prove that I don't need to spend my entire life being a peasant. And then we have the Magna Carta come in, right? So the Magna Carta comes in, it creates this idea that the king cannot violate people's rights. And you guys, it tells us something so important that we have never put down in history before. The king has rules to follow. That's it. We now have a document the king has signed. John signs away and says, yes, as a king, I have to follow my rules. That's basically what he's signing. And so it's so important to understand that this is a huge change in history. English common law and the role of judges and juries becomes more normal. Again, Henry II creates that system. We still use it today in 2020. And then we have the Model Parliament, right? Edward I comes in and says, hey, we need to give everyone a voice, commoners and lords. And that's exactly what he does. And so all of these changes, royal power strengthening, common people getting so much more power than anybody else. The king says, I will have to follow the rules no matter who I am. English common law, the role of judges and juries, model parliament, all of this together shows that feudalism isn't needed anymore because everyone is protected by law rather than being protected by the powers that they have.